Hi, guys. Welcome to the chat. I figured I'd go ahead and sign on now before something goes wrong, like a camera piece, something. So I figured I would go ahead and just sign on now and get started. I'm sure that you guys will trickle over as I start the conversation. I see you guys in the chat box. Welcome. Glad to have you. Hi, David. I see you there. This live chat is on a Tuesday instead of a Wednesday, just because I have some personal things I need to take care of on Wednesday night. So I'm not going to be able to do a live chat on my typical Wednesdays. So we're probably going to miss some people. They're not used to be doing live chats on Tuesday. But if you have your notifications turned on, you should be getting some of the information coming from me, whatever I post on whatever day. So let me just start by jumping into this topic. This has been a highly requested topic. I was going to put it into a video instead of a live chat, and then I had a client come in 3 weeks ago, and he's like, "Can you do a live chat so we can talk to you and ask some questions?" And so I said, "Yeah, let's go ahead and do a live." But I'm going to also do a follow-up video that's going to give you some insights and some coping skills and some treatment tools that you can use if you're struggling with post-traumatic stress, family therapy, I'm sorry, family trauma, I should say, not therapy, family trauma, and sleep. Sleep is one of the most important things that we need as humans, right? And I think though that it's so hard for us to rest our weary minds, because we are so used to doing things and thinking and processing. And if we're not doing things or thinking and processing, then we're on this thingy-ma-do here, right? We're scrolling through social media, we're watching YouTube, we're looking through TikTok. If you're a TikToker, we're looking through our Facebook page. Like, we're always constantly stimulating this thing called the brain. And because of that, sometimes it's really difficult for us to just rest and go to sleep. But here's what's interesting. If you have post-traumatic stress disorder from any traumatic experience, including your very own family, if you've had a traumatic family experience, then you most likely are going to struggle with sleep. I'm going to highlight a few categories tonight. I'm going to give you a little bit of information with the goal of wrapping up about 9:20. I do see you guys signing on. Welcome to the chat, Annabeth, the opener of Ways. I think I finally caught on to how to say your screen name. Welcome to the chat. Glad to see you. Courtney has a question here, and I think I'm going to read this one before I jump into the actual conversation on sleep. I'm also going to mention sleep paralysis. So be patient with me. I'm going to read this comment. So Courtney says, "Can children 3 or 4 have post-traumatic stress?" I am asking because I think I have had PTSD since the dead tree fell on my head a few days before my 4th birthday in 1988. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. That is really traumatic. And I wonder too if you have, like, I think that was thunder. Did you guys hear that? Oh my goodness. So if everything goes out, no, it was raining, thundering, and lightning outside my window. Courtney, I mean, that's traumatic. And I'm sure you kind of have some flashbacks, or you have some kind of episodic memories of that. Maybe you don't, I don't know, but that's enough to keep you up at night. I think that you definitely could have PTSD at that age. I think kids who are infants can actually have PTSD. It's displayed differently, than it would be in an adult or an older kid or an adolescent. But I also think too, and there's some research that backs this up, maybe I'll bring this up at a later time, that you can have post-traumatic stress disorder or some kind of acute stress because of an incident without being able to remember what happened. So you can have some symptoms without having an actual clear memory. So that's a really good question. I'm also going to bring up too in tonight's live chat just this theory of flashbacks and traumatic memories, and how that can negatively impact your sleep wake cycle. So let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, guys, did you know that 33% of our lives, 33% of our lives, according to some research on this topic, is spent sleeping? We don't have enough sleep. And again, because of what I said earlier, we're constantly stimulating our minds. But for those who have post-traumatic stress disorder, or those who are struggling with family trauma, sleep is that much worse. Part of it is because you can't rest your mind. The other part is you've got your central nervous system really trying to understand what is going on in your heart, what's going on in your mind, what's going on in your world. And so it's almost like your central nervous system is just alive, it's on this constant wake mode, and it really makes it difficult to get sleep. Now, I've had some people say to me who have post-traumatic stress or family trauma, and they're struggling with nightmares, they're struggling with sleep paralysis, they're struggling with sleep. I've heard these individuals say melatonin or any kind of over-the-counter meds for sleep either makes it worse, the nightmares, the PTSD, the sleep paralysis, sometimes even the night terrors. I've heard that these sleep aids can make it worse, or I have also heard that they just don't work at all. So stay tuned for the next couple of videos, guys, because in those videos, I'm going to give you some treatment tools on how to manage nightmares, PTSD, and this off sleep wake cycle that you may find yourself in. So I'm going to share something with you guys tonight. I didn't plan on sharing personal things. I'm going to give you a little taste of what it's like behind the scenes for me. So I actually have had a very, very long history of sleep difficulties. It hasn't been this simple thing of I just can't get to sleep at night, or I can't stay asleep, or I'm having some trouble resting my mind. For the past 8 years of my life, and I'm going to say a little bit before I went to college, so it's probably about 17, 18, I started suffering from sleep paralysis. Now, my sleep paralysis was really terrifying. It really took the form of terror. And I mean, like falling into a deep sleep in which I felt trapped and unable to get out of wherever I was. And I don't have a history of trauma. My childhood was wonderful. My mom was so loving. My grandmother, my dad was not around. He had PTSD. He was a veteran, and he did his own thing. He left my family when I was 5. My brother was 7. So, I mean, my dad wasn't around, but was my upbringing traumatic? Absolutely not. My mom did an absolutely wonderful job, if I could say so humbly myself, in raising me and my brothers and really loving us and constantly running to our rescue when we needed her. So I don't know where this came from, right? But I suffered for years, feeling trapped in my dreams, trapped in my sleep, not able to get help, sometimes feeling suffocated, sometimes feeling confused, sometimes waking up being really foggy for days. And I never understood why. And so, over the age of 32 now, I still suffer periodically, and I don't know why. For those of you, though, who are struggling with PTSD, family trauma, that kind of thing, sleep paralysis can take a very interesting turn. And the reason I share my story with you is to say this, that this scary thing happened to me for many, many years without doctors being able to tell me why. I was just left trying to figure this out. I tell you this because that's my story without trauma. But if you look at things maybe in your life and you have PTSD and you have family trauma, how much worse can nightmares be for you, sleep paralysis, and other things like that, right? So my situation was bad, but for most people with PTSD who are struggling with sleep paralysis or sleep or nightmares or whatever, it is 10 times what I experienced sometime. And it can literally feel like you're trapped, right? Because you can't get your mind to do what you know it can do, which is rest, sleep, and then wake up refreshed. It is just not there. That capability is gone. So let me give you some information on this, okay? So let's talk about post-traumatic stress, and then I'm going to go ahead to the chat box. I see you guys commenting, so I want to get to you as well. Post-traumatic stress disorder already has 2 really important symptoms that can mess with your sleep-wake cycle. Okay, the first is intrusion. So intrusion is part of the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. Intrusive memories of the trauma can include flashbacks. It can include unwanted memories. It can also include like this episodic memory where you're just going through your day, nothing's really triggering you, and all of a sudden you start thinking about that traumatic experience. You start thinking about your traumatic family. You start thinking about the narcissism, the psychopathy, apathy and the emotionally detached parent you had, or you start thinking about a loss or something, and you don't know where it's coming from. You don't have a direct trigger. You don't know, you didn't hear anything that triggered you. For some reason, you have this periodic, momentary kind of rewinding of events in your life that have been painful, hurtful, traumatic, the list goes on. That is intrusion. So that's one important symptom of PTSD that most providers look for. So hold that in your mind, intrusion. The other thing, the other criteria with PTSD that messes with nightmares and sleep paralysis and just your sleep wake cycle is hyperarousal. So intrusion on one side, hyperarousal on the other. Hyperarousal is basically this: I can't settle my nerves, my mind, my system enough to rest. I'm restless. I'm having difficulty relaxing. My body feels tense and tight. I feel hypervigilant. I feel like I'm constantly on the lookout, even when I'm trying to sleep, even when I'm trying to rest my mind. I feel like I have a sword up and a shield every single night I go to bed. I cannot rest my body. So hyperarousal. When you put those two things together, hyperarousal and intrusion, and you're struggling with nightmares, sleep paralysis, the list goes on, kaboom, right? It's like a huge disaster. And more times than not, you're probably going to have worsening symptoms of PTSD from whatever happened in your world. Family trauma, a traumatic event, a loss of some kind, you're probably going to continue to struggle with PTSD symptoms. Underlining the PTSD symptoms are typically the nightmares, typically the sleep paralysis, typically the poor sleep wake cycle. Okay. So you can kind of consider PTSD as the trigger to the sleep problems, because it's all working on the same parts of the brain, which I'm going to talk to you about in a little bit here. Let me go to the chat box. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second. I want to jump in here and answer some of your comments here. So glad to see you guys. So I see blessed in every area of my life. Hi, welcome to the chat. So glad to see you. Glad to see you, nobody. Thank you so much for that support. Nicole Mitchell, so nice to see you. She says, hey, Tamara, I suffer from mental illness, that is bipolar disorder and depression. I'm on medication for it. My grandma died on 6/16/22. I'm so sorry. My Lord, if you have a really good grandma, a grandparent of any kind, it's so hard to say goodbye. It's like that top person in your family who guides you is just gone. And it took its toll on my mental health. My depression is horrible. I'm just so sorry. Let me give you some suggestions, and maybe you're struggling with sleep too. I don't know. I think having bipolar disorder, having depression, and then trying to deal with grief, that in and of itself can really deter some healthy sleep patterns. It can really cause some insomnia, or what we call sleep disorder sometimes. It can also cause, this hyperactivity as soon as you lay down to get some sleep. It's almost like your body turns on and your mind turns on as soon as you lay down. Let me give you some suggestions. If you're not already in therapy, I wonder if seeking a therapist would be helpful. And really getting this clinician to tease apart, is what I'm struggling with depression and bipolar disorder alone, or am I going through a period of grief? And there's actually a diagnosis in the updated DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, that really focuses on and zones in on grief as a diagnosis, as a clinical syndrome. So that's something you may want to think about. Can I get my doctor, my therapist, to really help me tease apart, is this depression and bipolar that's affecting me while I'm trying to cope with loss, or do I actually have a clinical syndrome that could, have been the result of my loss and my grief? So that might be something to think about. Just thought I would throw that in there. Very sorry for your loss, by the way. Nobody says, was having nightmares last night, but I was intrigued by them. Oh my goodness. I have a client who has nightmares almost every night, and she comes in and she's like, Tamara, let me tell you what I dreamt last night. I'm like, oh God, I don't know if I want to hear this, because it disturbs me more than her, So some people are intrigued. I don't get that. I don't. I can see how, though. I can, nobody. I can see how. Sunflower Heather, so nice to see you. Welcome to the chat. Says, hi, all. My 25-year-old son has suffered from sleep paralysis for years, unfortunately. My goodness, it's so hard, you know? There's not a lot of research on sleep paralysis. Here's the reality. There's not a lot of research. We don't know a lot about sleep paralysis. Do we have a scientific explanation of the sleep-wake cycle and what goes on? Yes. Are there different brain regions that are affected by PTSD and trauma, and anxiety that has something to do with sleep paralysis? Absolutely. But do we absolutely know what's going on in sleep paralysis? No. Is there any research that's up to date that can tell us this is what's happening? Here's how you treat this. Here's what you need to do to stay healthy. Absolutely not. We literally have no clue as to what's going on. We have some hypotheses, but if you're like me and you have suffered from violent sleep paralysis, I call it violent because I always felt trapped, like I couldn't get out of where I was. If you're suffering from that, the last thing you want to hear is we don't know what's going on. We don't have the research, and that's the sad part. That's the sad part. Dragon Man Sassin says, Miss Tamara, are you going to be writing any book? I love it. Okay, so I'm currently writing a book with a publishing company. I don't want to say much because I don't know how much I can say, how much I can't say. It's done. It's taken me 3 years to write this book, and it is about intergenerational trauma. It's not about adults right now. I decided to zone in on a small population, and it's a pretty tricky topic. So I'm actually going to post a link to my upcoming book in the description box in case you're interested. Do I have plans to write future books? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yes. Glad you made it, Mel Kemp. Glad to see you. NJK, welcome to the chat. Glad to see you. Says, I had to move back in with my folks and feel like that fight or flight response is always active at night. Haven't slept well without pills in a few years. Yeah. Yeah. When your body, and I'm going to jump into this in a second here, guys, when your body and your brain really begins to struggle with your environment, begins to struggle with memories and flashbacks, or maybe you're being triggered by a specific environment that you are in, it is hard to rest because, again, your fight or flight response is being triggered. That central nervous system is being triggered. And now everything in your body is saying high alert, and it's hard to rest yourself when that happens. It's also really hard to swallow a melatonin or a couple. I had a client that would take like at least 5. I'm like, oh my God, please don't ever do that again. If you take melatonin and your body is on this high alert and you're being triggered by your environment or a memory or a flashback, melatonin is not going to help you. It's almost, here's an example. It's almost like this. Your fight or flight system is way up here. If you take a melatonin, that melatonin is it's going to miss it, right? It's slightly going to touch the issue. You're probably going to feel a little bit tired, maybe a little dreary, maybe a little irritable the next day, but you're not going to be able to conquer your system that's on high alert with a melatonin and get some sleep. Let me make a suggestion, and this is not a promotion by any stretch, but it has worked for my clients. I would try Ollie sleep vitamins, OLLY. And you can get them from Target, you can get them from Walmart, you can get them online. What I like about Ollie Sleep is that they kind of mix in their scientific concoction. They mix a variety of herbs and chamomile and melatonin and things in their delicious gummies. And you can take 2 at bedtime. And what happens is the body and the brain responds differently to sleep Ollie vitamins than it does a typical melatonin pill in your nearest pharmacy. We'll put it that way. So that's a suggestion for all of you. Fairy Girl, nice to see you. Welcome to the chat. Yeah, let me read this by Nobody, and then I'm going to jump into explaining this a little bit more. Excuse me. Nobody says, when one dies, it is painful because love is an eternal force. To have a life is such a beautiful gift. Yeah. So when you lose someone like Nicole did, I think that was her name. I want to make sure I got it right. Yes, like Nicole did, it's really hard to say goodbye. It's hard to shut your heart off. That's the best way I know to put that. Okay, guys, so let me jump into what's happening in your brain here and what's causing this poor ability to sleep, what's causing these night terrors, what's causing sleep paralysis. So, the areas of the brain that's most important to you, especially if you have PTSD or you have family trauma and it's negatively impacted you, is the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. Let me give you a little bit of a demonstration. And I'm going to really try my best not to get too scientific here, but I just want you to know what's possibly going on in your brain, okay? So, here's a really bad brain, okay? Okay, in this really bad brain, we have the frontal lobes, we have the parietal lobes at the top of the brain, we have the temporal lobes on the side near our temples, and then we have the occipital lobes in the back. So here's how I'm going to do this, just so you can keep up. Frontal lobes, temporal lobes, occipital, and parietal. So here's what's happening here. In the frontal lobe area, this is where we really deal with a lot of our thought processes, content of our lives, personality development is here, decision making is here, higher order, sophisticated and intellectual processing happens here in the frontal cortex. And I'm going to say also, too, in this area of the brain, this is where we kind of have the ability to control our impulses. Now, when the brain has been impacted by PTSD, the ability to utilize this part of the brain becomes difficult because at that point with PTSD, we're dealing a lot with the amygdala, which is that almond-sized structure I always talk about on this channel that has a lot to do with kind of sensing out the environment like a flashlight. It's constantly looking around your environment, wondering what's going on, wondering what's there that could threaten you. And I can't remember who made this comment. Yeah, it was NJK saying that being back in the environment with parents was triggering to them, to this person. So with the amygdala, what's being triggered is this fight or flight response from the amygdala. The amygdala, excuse me, is saying, hey, there's danger here. Something's going on in your environment, and I'm not able to cope with it. Run. And so that kind of helps kickstart the central nervous system that's sped up, right? Your heart rate goes up, you start sweating, you feel like you're shaking, out of control, you can't sleep, that whole thing. And I'm going to get into that just a little bit more later in the chat. So the frontal cortex is a little bit difficult to be controlled with a person who has PTSD. That's affected for sure. The ability to reason, the ability to make decisions, your ability to kind of process what's going on in a logical, intellectual sense. Because again, PTSD affects the emotional parts of the brain, which when the emotions are so high that you can't function, then our ability to reason, intellectualize, make decisions, control impulses, all of that executive functioning goes out the window. It's gone. Now, here's another part of the brain, the occipital lobes, which is in the back of the brain, which really does control our vision. The back of the brain also controls our ability to move, our movements, our motor control. This part of the brain in the back, the occipital lobes, the back of the brain really is affected as well with PTSD. And it's also affected by nightmares and sleep paralysis. That is why you may see people struggle with, or you may struggle yourself with sleepwalking. Sleepwalking is another phenomenon that we are very confused about. We have some answers, but we don't have a lot of them. But sleepwalking really does have a lot to do with the back of the brain, which again has a lot to do with motor control, and the occipital lobes has a lot to do with vision. So when you're sleepwalking and you're moving around and, you're in this stage, you're asleep, but you're moving around, maybe you're sleep eating, maybe you're sleep driving, that has happened before. Maybe you're just walking around your house or you're unlocking the front door, whatever, that has a lot to do with the back of the brain. PTSD also impacts the back of the brain. Okay, I'm going to pause here for a second because I know neuroscience can be really tough to kind of conceptualize, and I want to give you guys a little bit of a break in my own mind break. So let me get back to the comments, okay, guys? Sunflower Heather says, "Thank you. There is little to no helpful info on this." Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sleep and PTSD needs to be a conversation that's had in a way that's easy to understand, which is why I'm doing this, which is why I'm kind of, I don't know if you can tell, I'm trying to be very careful in how I explain this so that it can be understandable and not overwhelming and intimidating. So I very much agree. There's not enough information on it. Nobody says a maniacal entity that assaulted me and left. When the entity left, I screamed out of my sleep. Oh my goodness. So I think I think you said, in my experience, a maniacal entity that assaulted me and left. When the entity left, I screamed out of my sleep. We'll never forget it. Yeah, absolutely. Sounds more like a night terror to me. I want to say my grandmother, who passed away 2 years ago, she used to struggle all the time with night terrors. And my mom would have to, when they were living together, my mom would have to go and like nudge my grandma and wake her up because she was like in this place, and you could literally hear her fighting and trying to get out. And I will say my grandmother had some trauma, and I think that's where her sleep issues came from. For you, it just sounds like that was horrific. I'm not even sure that I'm not even sure that I would even not record that. I would record that, nobody. I would really put that down in a journal and then journal your emotions and your thoughts and your feelings after, in case it ever happens again. You might find some patterns or something. I don't know. But that would terrify me for sure. Okay, I'm going to keep going, guys. I want to make sure that I don't forget your comments at the bottom. Christina Turner, welcome to the chat. Glad to have you. Says, I wore a pulse oximeter. That's an interesting one. And my oxygen goes down and my heart rate goes up, and I have night terrors in my sleep with dissociative amnesia from trauma-based ritual abuse and military assault. My goodness. So let me wrap my mind around this before I jump into this one. I understand the oximeter, which is really helpful, but I wonder if in some ways that may have added to some of the night terrors. Now, there's some research on certain things like the CPAP and some other devices that can sometimes trigger sleep paralysis, but I'm not too versed on that research, and I don't want to talk on that unless I have a little bit more information. I will say, though, that dissociative amnesia, which is a form of amnesia where you dissociate or you pull away from reality so much that you almost forget where you're at, what happened, when the trauma happened, if the trauma ever happened at all. And some people suffer so much from dissociative amnesia that they literally take on a brand new identity, and they sometimes go on long trips away from home, and they kind of develop a brand new life. And I'll talk about that on this channel at some point. But it is the result of trauma. It is the result of dissociation, but it's at a little bit more of an intense level. Dissociative amnesia is a major trigger for sleep paralysis, for nightmares, because again, it's pulling you away from reality. You're dissociating from reality, and so you lose your grounding, right? You're not grounded anymore, and so that kind of sets the stage for sleep paralysis, nightmares, and sometimes even sleepwalking. Let me mention too, while I'm on this topic, there's something, and I'm going to draw you a picture really quickly so you can kind of stay with me. I don't know how to do this. Okay, I'm going to try my best. Don't make fun of me. So the brain, so we're going to make this the brain, okay? And this is the spinal cord. Can you see this? Yeah, this is the spinal cord, okay? So you have the brain and you have the spinal cord. It goes down that bony vertebrae in your back. So here's what else is attached to that. Inside of the vertebrae, or in the brain, I should say, in the spinal cord, is something known as the RAS system. Hold on. I want to make sure I'm drawing this out right for you. It's the reticular activating system. I'm sorry, I should have finished that. So you have the brain, you have the spinal cord. Inside the spinal cord, inside the brain stem is the RAS, the reticular activating system. And here's what happens there. It controls breathing, it controls fight or flight, it controls the automatic pieces of our body, our breathing, kind of like, how our blood flows through our body, oxygen. It controls all of the things in our body that's automatic. Okay, the reticular activating system, excuse me. And that basically controls our sleep wake cycle, and it also controls REM sleep. If you have post-traumatic stress disorder, all of that is thrown off. All of it is thrown off. And there's some research that suggests sleep paralysis, nightmares, and bad dreams or nightmares because of PTSD is associated with the reticular activating system, that automatic process that also triggers central nervous system. I'll call it central nervous system dominance. That's the word I always use on here, which is fight or flight in layman's terms. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier to you guys before I go back to the comments, that the cortex, so the brain, it has all these little ventricles on top of it. The cortex, just that outer layer of the brain, that is the part of the brain that really helps us make sense out of the content of our nightmares. So when we're having a nightmare, the cortex is saying, hey, you're in a dark, bad place again. You're back with your uncle who violated you. You're back in the military when this happened to you. You're back with your aunt and your cousin when they beat you really bad, right? So the cortex and the frontal lobes, which does all of that intellectual and rationalizing of what's going on, really takes the content of your dream or your nightmare and helps you understand what you're actually dreaming. But again, when you get thrown into fight or flight, it's really hard for the brain to grasp sometimes the content of the dream. And that is why there may be times you wake up and you're like, what the heck did I just dream? I can't remember a thing. Your emotions and your fight or flight has overpowered the whole entire process, if that makes sense. So for you, Christina Turner, I hope that you will stick around for my video. I think it's going to be, I have 3 videos coming up, and then I'm going to post a video on treatment tools for people with PTSD who are struggling with nightmares, night terrors, and sleep paralysis. So stay tuned for that. Mel Kep says, I don't have sleep paralysis, but I have endless nightmares, and having any problems in my day and nightmares will get worse. Wow, absolutely. So the brain is really complex. It's inherently complex. Like, we're still trying to figure out what certain areas of the brain actually does, and new research seems to come out every single day. So the brain is complex, but here's what's even more interesting. Sometimes you can cope with PTSD, you can cope with those nightmares a little bit better. Once you add stress to the equation, then cortisol gets released in the brain. So we have so here's a really bad picture of the brain again. There's like a little pea-sized organ that's in the center of our brain, and it's called the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland basically has all around it stress hormone that kind of is secreted from the pituitary gland. When stress hormone secretes from that particular gland, it goes through the body, and a stress hormone, cortisol, is one that you're probably more aware of, or or you've heard of. Once that gets kicked off in the body, then a cascade of mechanisms happen. And sometimes, for those of you who are struggling with family trauma, PTSD, and you're trying to sleep, if your body is functioning as if you're in a traumatic situation and you've got cortisol running all through your body, it's going to be really hard for you to battle nightmares, to battle sleep paralysis, and to get a peaceful night's sleep. So yes, that does make it worse. Stress in your daily life can sometimes exacerbate PTSD symptoms, and really cause a complicated scenario for you, because some people have dreams of the very thing they went through in that day, if that makes sense. And so I have a client actually that used to see me specifically for nightmares and PTSD. And she said every experience in her day, she would go to sleep and dream it. It was like reliving it again. But because of her daily stress, it just made it 10 times worse. So glad you brought that up, Melkep. That's important. I think briefly too, one way that you can cope with that a little bit is coping skills and relaxation before bedtime. That can help. Um, Okay, I'm going to keep going. Courtney Frazier says, I have no memories of it. I just remember being told about the tree accident and have a teddy bear that my grandparents, dad's parents gave me when I was still in the hospital. I see. So you can't remember the traumatic incident. I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in your subconscious, the brain actually remembers that traumatic event, Courtney. Sometimes that does happen, and there's research that backs that you could have a traumatic experience that you yourself cannot remember, but your brain reacts as if it remembers that particular trauma. That probably sounds really confusing, but sometimes the brain can act as if you remember that trauma. So you could have symptoms and PTSD as a result, even if you can't necessarily remember the trauma. That's kind of like people who have been sexually abused. They know something has happened to them, but they can't put their finger on what it is. And they have symptoms of PTSD or acute stress, but they just can't pinpoint what's going on. So that can happen. That can happen in your situation as well, Courtney. Nicole Mitchell says, I've been having trouble sleeping ever since my grandma died. It took a toll on my mental health, my depression. It's horrible. And I stopped eating. I'm so sorry. Let me just say, if you are not eating, sleeping, and you're not functioning well for an entire month, or maybe a month and a couple of weeks, I would see someone because again, you could be struggling from depression and anxiety and grief, but then you could also have a clinical type of grief that really requires a specific trauma informed care. So you're definitely in my prayers, and feel free to reach out to me if you need some guidance on who to turn to. My email is in the description box below. Blessed in every area of my life says, I deal with it in the name of Jesus stops it for me. No other name. Absolutely. And I can't say that I disagree with you, because I have done the very same thing in the past where I've been trapped in my sleep paralysis. And yes, I have done that, and it works every single time. Tell me why. I have my personal beliefs why, but I'm sure there are other people that think differently, but it has worked for me. So it does not shock me at all that it works for you. NJ, welcome to the chat. Glad to have you. It says, can't wait to read your books. Thank you so much. That's so sweet. Thank you. Rose M, so nice to see you. Welcome to the chat. Says, how can CBT be used to cope with childhood, adolescent alienation by my narc dad against my mom? Feels awkward, usually like personal space, but leads to tension when I listen hypercritically. Whoa. So that's a little off the topic of what we're talking about, but I'm going to try to, I think what I'm going to do, and Rose M, I'm going to do what I do with everybody else on chat when they have an awesome question. I'm going to take a picture of it if I can get to my photo. And then we're going to wrap up in a little bit here, guys. I'm going to take a picture of it, and it is literally on my phone as proof. It is here, and I'm going to read your comment in the next live chat because I'm going to be touching on those kind of things. NJK says, that was much appreciated. I'll check out Amazon shortly. Yeah, you're welcome. Hopefully they sell them in Canada. Yeah, absolutely. Let me give you also a little bit of a different resource, and I'm not promoting this person, and I have not touched the book yet. I just ordered it just for one of my clients, and it's a book on sleep paralysis. So you want to go to Amazon, type in Sleep Paralysis by Samuel Williams, and tell me what you think of that book if you get it. I haven't gotten it yet. It's on its way. I'm going to flip through it, and I'll come back and tell you guys what I think of it. But it specifically zones in on sleep paralysis. It's by Samuel Williams. Okay, Marie, glad to see you. Welcome to the chat. Says, cut off ties with emotionally unavailable mother. Feel bad because she is nice, but she just not there. But she's just not there. Sadly, she lives a few states away. Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that. Marie, I'm going to be jumping back into the topic of psychopaths and sociopaths and narcissistic family and traumatic family dynamics next live chat next Wednesday. So stay tuned for that. Yes, you're welcome, Sunflower Heather. She says, this is gold. Thank you. I'm really glad. I'm honored to hear that. That's wonderful. Let me just tell you, I'm a therapist at heart. I think, if you take my title off of me as a professional, deep down, I'm still a therapist. I think that's where the passion runs deep. And despite being a therapist who's passionate about her job and her clients and people who follow me, there's still this fear, that what if I don't do this right? Or what if I don't say this right? Or what? And so when I shared my own story of sleep paralysis, I'm like, I don't know if I want to share that. So I'm really glad to hear that it's helpful. And I'm hoping that this live chat will be something you guys will want to see again, because I think there's a lot to be said about sleep paralysis, PTSD, and nightmares, sleep-wake issues. I just think we don't know enough about it. We just don't, and we need to. It's very, very important. Hi, George. Welcome to the chat. So glad to see you. Welcome. Marie, I'm going to pray that happens. Marie says Tamara will have 100K subs in no time. She's very sharp and intuitive. Thank you. Much further ahead than most therapists. Okay, she shut the whole chat down. Thank you so much. I'm so humbled by that. Thank you. Okay, guys, let me just jump briefly back into a little bit of information on the brain and your sleep-wake cycle and what's going on here, and then we're going to wrap up. We're literally going to turn off before 10 p.m., I promise. Let me mention the limbic system and the amygdala. PTSD, when you have any kind of trauma, there is almost like this increased activity in the limbic system and in the amygdala, it's that almond-sized structure I always talk about. I mentioned it a couple minutes ago. Around that almond-sized structure is another structure, okay? So consider this the almond, right? My fist. There's another structure that goes around that, and it is called the limbic system, and it has a lot to do with emotional memories. It has a lot to do with emotional responses to things. And sometimes when you're having sleep paralysis, nightmares, and you have had traumatic experiences in the past, those two things collide. And so the brain really doesn't know how to respond. You're already vulnerable because of the PTSD, because of the trauma. And then, your emotional centers of the brain, the limbic system, the amygdala is responding like there's a threat in the environment. You feel like you're vigilant. Your body is on high alert. But then here you go having sleep paralysis or a nightmare, and it just kind of re-triggers that whole process. The amygdala is the beginning of that fight or flight system. Think of it this way. The amygdala is like a flashlight, and anything you do is being researched and searched out by the amygdala. And so when you lay down to go to sleep at night, your amygdala, especially if you have PTSD, is constantly looking for a threat. And maybe that threat is a memory. Maybe that threat is a flashback. Maybe that threat is something you watched on YouTube. Maybe that threat is something that happened in your day. Whatever, your amygdala is saying, warning, I am now threatened. And so therefore, everything else is going to start off in your body. Stress hormones, fight or flight, all of that stuff. Hyperarousal, intrusive memories, maybe some flashbacks, and you make it really tired because the body probably gets tired. Fight or flight mode tires your body out, right? It's like an engine. It goes, and it's good. It's there to protect you, but it's draining. And especially if this happens to you every single night before you go to bed. So your body is already exhausted. So you're most likely going to pass out and wake up and not even feel refreshed, right? It's like your whole mind and body has just been through this whole tornado. There's another part of the brain called the insular cortex. Now, let me show you how this is spelled. So insular. I messed that up. Insular. I think I spelled this right. Insular. The insular cortex. Okay. That is a part of the brain, that is impacted with PTSD. It's also impacted with sleep, and there's decreased activity there. And that can sometimes create like this imbalance. The insular cortex is a part of the brain that has a lot to do with our homeostasis. It keeps our body balanced. And so it really allows what's called the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Those are two systems that functions when you're in fight or flight. Those two systems, the insular cortex kind of keeps them balanced. And so there's decreased activity in that part of the brain when you're having a nightmare, when you're in sleep paralysis, or when you're in a night terror. And so that is why sometimes you may actually wake up in a sweat, in a cold sweat. You may wake up trembling, you may wake up nervous, fearful. Your whole entire brain and body is thrown completely off. All right, guys, let me go to the chat box. All right, I'm going to go back to the chat box, answer some of your questions, comments, and we're going to sign off. George says, can you have PTSD and not have nightmares? I only get flashes of what happened while awake and relive the feelings intensely. That's why I go through stages where I just want to sleep. Yeah, absolutely. You can have PTSD without the nightmares. The way that I like to explain this, George, to clients is this. PTSD has a lot of criteria. You have to have a stressor. You have to have the intrusive memories. You have to have that avoidance, you avoiding that thing that has caused the trauma. You have to have that destabilization of your mood and your behavior. You have to have all of that, right? You don't necessarily have to have nightmares. You could just have those intense flashbacks, George, where you kind of relive everything. It's almost like having a really lucid dream for most people that have PTSD, and they're experiencing those flashbacks and not those nightmares. So yeah, you can definitely be diagnosed with PTSD and not have nightmares. Think of it this way, George, that PTSD is this huge umbrella, and underneath that umbrella is a variety of symptoms that you may or may not have. Everybody is different when it comes to PTSD. So keep that in mind. Krista Turner says dissociative amnesia blocks out traumatic memories. Yeah, it does. It does. It becomes this big defense or this big wall. Let me also say that if you're having nightmares and you're struggling with PTSD at the same time, or you have PTSD and you're struggling with nightmares, as well as stress in your daily life, all of that concoction can actually block the progress of PTSD. That can actually block your ability to heal from PTSD. So keep that in mind. If you're having nightmares all the time, you're struggling with sleep paralysis, you're struggling with night terrors, or you're just not getting the sleep that you need, that can exacerbate the symptoms of PTSD. So you want to keep that in mind. I would Google for your own homework, PTSD and sleep disorders or parasomnias, however you want to put that. I would Google that and see what comes up. I'm also going to post some things in the description box for you once this video ends and it kind of gets up and running in YouTube. Yeah, Fairy Girl, you're saying some great things. I want to make sure, hold on. I think I missed a comment of yours. And I'm so sorry, Fairy Girl. I try to make sure I get your comments in here. I really do. I think Fairy Girl is referring to those who feel that they are assaulted in their sleep. Yeah, that's also part of sleep paralysis. But here's where it gets tricky. So we have what I call mainstream sleep paralysis. You may have what's called hypnagogic hallucinations, which is when I'm falling asleep, I'm seeing and hearing things or feeling things that are not really there. And when I'm waking up, I'm also feeling and hearing and seeing things that are not there. It's kind of like the brain's transitioning period, and anything is likely in that moment. However, that's like mainstream normal sleep paralysis. But if we go to a different side of things, now we're talking sleep paralysis that's really frightening and sometimes can be really dark, right? Some people and some research suggests that those who have PTSD or do not have PTSD and just have sleep paralysis feel like demons are choking them or sitting on them, or they're being even sexually assaulted in their sleep. There have also been stories, and research backs this, of people who have PTSD and sleep paralysis, they actually feel like they are trapped in a cage, and they're screaming and they're fighting in their sleep, and no one on the outside of them can help them, because looking at them laying in that bed sleeping, you wouldn't think anything is going on, but their mind and their heart is being tormented. And so sleep paralysis is really complicated, because you've got that mainstream sleep paralysis that some people just really minimize and downplay, like, yeah, that's just something you had an experience with when you were falling asleep or waking up. But then you also have that side of things where, some people are afraid that they may die. And so it gets really intense. It really does. Welcome to the chat. Eyes wide shut. Glad to see you. Says, good evening, Doc. Sending much peace and love. Thank you. Sending it back to you. That's so sweet. Says, my husband and I both experienced this. Him from the Vietnam War, me from abuse from my parents. My God, yeah, it's really difficult. And here's what's even more difficult before we inch up to signing off here. It's really difficult to separate dreams sometimes that are of a PTSD nature from reality. And so you may wake up feeling like you're still in that dream. You may feel like you're in a fog and you're walking in the fog, and you just need somebody to shake you and say, wake up. Sometimes PTSD and nightmares can really take your life over in that way. And that's the sad part. Awesome. I'm so proud of you. NJK, I just saw that. Says, just ordered 2 packs of the Ollie vitamin. Should be here on Thursday. I love you people. You guys are the best in the world, let me say. And I also love people who have Amazon. I had a client tonight. She's like, Tamara, what can I do about my aches and pains? And I'm like, try these vitamins. And she's like, really? Well, how much are they? And she's on her phone and she's like, they'll be here Sunday. I'm like, how do you do this? When I'm at home, I have to take my credit card out and look up the vitamins and do some research. Yeah. I'm like a senior citizen when it comes to Amazon. You guys are like, it'll be here on Thursday. I love it, NJK. Very proud of you. I hope it works. Oh, that's so sweet. I see Marie sending love. That's so sweet. Okay, let me make sure I'm not missing anything, guys. Hi, Timothy Brown. Nice to see you. Welcome to the chat. Says, that's so sweet. Thank you. Says, big supporter for a while now. Glad to finally be live with you. Yeah, welcome. I'm sorry this topic is so depressing, but we need to talk about these hard topics. Yes. Hi, Christina. Welcome to the chat. Glad to see you. Says, thank you, Tamara. Your videos just really help things click for me. Oh, that's so sweet. And you're welcome. I'm so glad to hear that. That's why I do these videos for sure. Awesome. Welcome to the chat. I haven't seen you in a while. Says, my daughter was having sleep paralysis. I think she has experienced trauma that she won't admit. She is 12. Oh my. Before we sign off, guys, let me just say that sometimes kids, and I specialize within my practice here treating children, teens, and families, so like they're in and out of my door all day like a revolving door. Kids are interesting because sometimes if you approach things at a different angle with different language, with a different intent, they will sometimes open up. So she may not address the trauma specifically, but maybe if you possibly buy her a sleep journal, she will keep track of her dreams. Or maybe if you take her to a therapist who's really good at, understanding sleep paralysis, maybe she'll start talking about the sleep paralysis, the content, what happened to her, and it might just click. Oh my God, this is something that happened to me way back when I was 5 or 4. So kids are interesting. You really have to know how to knock and get inside for sure. Just some suggestions I figured I would offer. Yes, NJK, you are on it tonight. My goodness, they're like ordering the book I just suggested. It's yes, it is Sleep Paralysis, a deeper biblical understanding. Let me forewarn you, the client that suggested this to me stated that there is some biblical references, if I can say it, in there. But my understanding when I look through the Kindle version is that there's some spiritual and philosophical pieces of the puzzle as well to that book. So I forewarned you if he gets really religious on you. But I saw some philosophy and some other interesting pieces of the book as well when I look through the Kindle version. I'm waiting on my copy in JK. Ah, that's so sweet. Thank you. Awesome. I appreciate that. Sure. Okay, he or she says, please train other therapists. I mean, that's humble. Like, that's humbling. I mean, let me just say, I've had really wise people in my small circle. I keep a very small circle, and it's between my mom, my brothers, not even my brother's family. Okay, it's my mom, my brothers, and probably 3 colleagues that I highly, highly respect. Seriously, that's my small circle of experts in my world. And so they build me so that I can help give you guys things. So I will take that as a humble, you were good at what you do. So thank you so much for that. Thank you. I will say that there are some therapists that could use additional training, and there's so many reasons why. Um, and there's still areas where I also need additional training. So we're all in that same boat. David, welcome to the chat. I think I said hello to you earlier. I can't remember. I spaced. David says, Tamara, can you please answer my question during your next live stream? Why does my wife want a relationship with her toxic mother, whereas I am able to put boundaries and even cut myself off? Yeah, here I go. I'm taking a picture right now. David, I'm not going to ignore you. I'm not going to ignore you. I got it. I'll bring it up in the next live chat for sure. Yes, you're welcome, George. Yes, Christina, it's the insular cortex. Did I spell it right? No, I spelled it wrong. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Christina. I appreciate that. Yeah, good night, Dragon Man Assassin. I am on my way out of here as well. Okay, guys. Oh, Jade, so nice to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time. Jade says, are there any medications to treat night terrors, nightmares? No. And that's the other thing. We don't know what to do about it. And so because of that, our information on medication is pretty slim. I will go ahead after this live chat sometime between tonight and tomorrow, list in the description box a couple of medications that may be able to kind of help. Some people say antidepressants can be helpful. Some people say Adderall and Strattera and Concerta can sometimes keep those anxiety feelings that you get, or those anxious feelings that you may get during the day. I wouldn't say at bedtime. Sometimes ADHD medication is also used to kind of treat what's the word that I'm looking for? This like scattered mindset that you may get after a night's sleep. So there's a couple of things that's available. So I'm going to try to add that in the description box for you. Hi, Jacob. So nice to see you. Welcome to the chat. Okay, guys. Oh, Namo. Is it Namo D Silva? Welcome to the chat. So glad to see you. Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to sign off tonight. We had a little bit of a shorter chat tonight. Namo. Okay, I got it. Totally got it. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to sign off tonight. I'm going to see you guys in the next live chat. There may be a video on Sunday, so stay tuned for that. I hope this video was helpful. If it is, let me know in the chat comment section below, and I will certainly plan to do more videos like this with you in the future. Have a good night, guys. Love you so much. You guys are wonderful. Have a good night.